I'd like to thank you today for coming and joining us with the Coalition of Hamilton Indigenous Leadership Tea Talks. And I have two beautiful ladies here with me, Connie McKnight.
My name is Constance McKnight. My friends call me Connie. My spirit name is McCormack, which means the turtle with the red markings, the one who helps all of the people all of the time. I'm Moose Cray Métis from up north in James Bay. And I'm the happy wife, mother of 6, and grandmother of 11.
And Cindy Sue Montana McCormack.
Sago Guego. My name is Cindy Sue Montana McCormack. I'm Turtle Clan from Mohawks Bay of Quinte, Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory. I'm 62 years old, mother of 1 who recently passed last August, but still grandmother to 1 and auntie to many.
I welcome these two lovely ladies to coming to our Tea Talks today. And as part of the project, what we're trying to do is focus on our history. Really, it's the history of Indigenous peoples, right? And all the players that had a role within the Hamilton area. And I've had a great time speaking with a number of speakers and to kind of shape where they came into Hamilton. Some were born in Hamilton, some weren't born in Hamilton. So if I can start with you, Cindy, are you good with that right now? Okay, so where's your
Born and raised in Hamilton all of my life.
Okay.
Born in 1961. A member of the Hamilton Indigenous community all of my life. We weren't so much involved with the programming that went on because my mother worked full time, but my aunties were. And I guess that's where most of my personal involvement with the Hamilton Indigenous community began, was learning how to be a helper for my aunts and my mother and all the people before us. And to me, I think that's the really important message, is that all of us are helpers. And that sort of reflects on our grassroots ideology about making sure that we are reflective of the community at large and carry the message forward on their behalf because we're their voice. But yeah, I was a helper. When did I become officially involved career-wise? Again, it would be right after the birth of my son. We were living out in BC. And once I was pregnant, it was time to come back to Hamilton. And that was in 1990. So I began my career in the Indigenous community of Hamilton in 1993. 92, 93.
I thought it was 92. No, okay.
Yeah, 92, because he was 2 years old.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that's
so
when I met you, was in 92.
1992. And I began by working with NEPAM, the Niagara Peninsula Aboriginal Area Management Board. I think it's funny because I can still remember their Mohawk name that was given to them, which is Skana Ogwayoto, which means all of us helping each other together. So, and the people that work for NEPAM now don't even know that themselves.
No? I actually have a jacket. Remember those red and black, white
Yeah.
jacket? Kurt has one still.
Yeah.
And he's got NEPAM on it.
So that was in 1992. And I think that was my beginning of a career within the Hamilton Indigenous organizations. It was also my beginning of a more official role on the different boards within the Hamilton regional, or within the Hamilton region, which would be, my first one would be the Hamilton Regional Indian Center. I sat there along with Yvonne. Yvonne and I served on the board there for many years. And between being the president and the vice president, or
We
those
took
roles
turns.
changing, I think that's something important to note, is that how much we promote the fact of our youth serving the community through the Indigenous agencies themselves, and how they can grow experientially and knowledge-wise if they work within our community agencies. So, and from NEPAM begat Ogisto. Working with the Indian Center, I think it's important to note that the Indian Center was the first agency in Hamilton, along with the Native Women's Center. And from those two agencies begat all the rest of the agencies. So from the Native Women's Center, that's where Sacramento Nonprofit Housing was born. And from the Indian Center, both Yvonne and I sat on their board when we looked into the next agencies that were to become, and that would be the Urban Native Homes, Nawasa, and the Aboriginal Health Center. So I sat on the board for those iterations of new agencies, and I was involved in all the various committees as we were for the Indian Centers Board. We had to volunteer our time on some of these new agencies, so we sat on the policy and procedures committees and the let's go find a new spot for them to live committee, and location committees and governance committees. And so again, you learn a lot when you start sitting on these various committees, and that can be through volunteer work. And again, we should be promoting that with our youth. I think the health center was the last one that we got off the ground, and that would have been
1997?
There you go. So, and that's where Connie, my friend here, became more involved and became our health authority for the Hamilton area. And when did you start in Hamilton?
2011.
2011. 2011. Holy.
Yes.
So that's a long time. But I think it's, again, reflective back on the Indian Center. We learned from a grassroots community level that, and through the Indian Center's provincial partner, the Ontario Federation of Indian Friendship Centers, both Yvonne and I learned much more about the politics involved at the provincial level, at the federal level. I think from that we bring it back to our local community about the importance of being more politically aware of their systems. So that involved learning how to develop relationships at a municipal level, a provincial level, and a federal level, and learning their systems and how we don't need to mirror their systems, but we need to reflect on what their systems are and figure out how our system can work within their system. So I think that was part of our growth as a community, is learning about politics.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we keep abreast of politics? I think it's something that we were aware of at a younger generation, but we still haven't learned how to do it well. And I think that's part of our legacy that we're leaving the next generations, is we're on the path of learning how to operate within their systems, but still reflect a grassroots approach and ideology. I think that was in the early, NEPAM. NEPAM, then I sat on the Indian Center. From NEPAM, and through my work with the Indian Center, I guess my next big move was working for the Social Planning Research Council of Hamilton, and I eventually became the senior social planner with the SPRC of Hamilton. And I think that's important to reflect back on our community history, how much we learned from that mainstream agency. We learned the importance of that's where I got my training of how to work within their systems, because they were the ones that showed me what those systems were made up of and how we could still work within that system and still maintain our autonomy as Indigenous people, but still push for our right to make our own decisions. Don't just throw us money, don't just tell us, oh, here's $1 million. Well, $1 million nowadays, back in the day it was 200,000. Here's $200,000. Well, don't give us money if there's all sorts of strings attached, and telling us what the priorities are. So local autonomy and decision making was one of the first messages I started promoting through my work with the SPRC. And with that work in 2003, 2004, I made a pitch to the mainstream Community Advisory Board, and basically the message was, we might only reflect 1.8% of your overall population, but as part of the homeless population, conservatively we reflect at least 20%. Unconservatively, at the time we were thinking it was closer to 30%. So based on that sort of 5-in-1 methodology, we thought we should be getting at least 20% of their funds for homelessness. So I made a pitch to the Community Advisory Board, and I worked a long time on that pitch. I only had, half an hour or something at the CAB meetings at that time?
They were short.
Yeah, they were short, and you had to utilize every minute you had, and the pitch went well, and we ended up getting 20% of the homelessness funds from the city of Hamilton.
I just want to add something to that. One thing she's not mentioning, I spent a year with those guys on the community advisory board, right? As but one person going there, and it was the hardest committee I was ever on, because again, one person against many, you're just one. And my voice was not, I left that meeting crying. I left, because you know how I am, people, and frustrated. And so I went back to Cindy Sue in the group, and I says, I'm done. I've had a year in that committee. It's not getting me anywhere. I says, but if we send people, you need two, because there's no way to send one. We send two. And then Cindy Sue, who went with you?
No, I didn't sit on the board.
I know, but you eventually went to make this pitch.
Yep.
Who went with you?
Nobody.
Just yourself?
Yep.
Okay.
Who was sitting on the board at the time was Elise Hartley, our elder, and Buddy Martin.
Okay.
And he wasn't there for that meeting, but Elise was. And but again, that promotes how we've come up with some of our methodologies now. You know, again, one of my messages moving forward from that point was, if you're going to invite us to sit on your committees, we want 2 seats or 3 seats. We do not want one person, one token Indian sitting there and being beat down. And at that time, there was a lot more emphasis on knowledge being university professors, and you know, the people around that table were all very professional people. So learning your target audience and how to present the information to them where they would get what you're saying and be on your side, that was a big coup for us. And we got 20% of the funding. Like, we've come a long way. And the Indigenous youth nowadays need to realize, like, look at how much money we're pulling into the community now since that time. You know, we have $1 million in poverty. We have $1 million for homelessness. We had different funds coming in during the COVID years. We've went from, you know, a $200,000 annual budget to $3 and $4 million annual budget minimum, and that's just one agency. So we've come a long way. So it makes me laugh when I hear the youth complain sometimes. It's like, stop your complaining. Don't you know in the day? I feel like our grandparents say, we used to walk up on the snow and uphill, 10 below, you know. That's what I feel like saying to the youth. You don't realize what it took for the people before us, and the people in present, and the people as we move forward. So I guess part of our messaging should be to give, you know, thanks and gratitude for those players, because those helpers, before we were involved, you know, we had those helpers that first set up the agencies, and most of our agencies are done on a not-for-profit basis with volunteers from the community. So we had our, you know, volunteers, those were our helpers 40 and 50 years ago in the Hamilton community. Those helpers, our aunties, our uncles, our previous generations, our ancestors are the actual beginning, or the beginning helpers in the city of Hamilton. And it was from them and their development and their commitment to the different boards for the different agencies. I think that's important to recognize, as it's not just us as the leaders. Those were leaders in their time. And it's a good thing that we're writing down this history and recognizing those leaders now. Those that came before us, those that continue the good fight right now, and hopefully those that are coming afterwards, our nieces, our nephews, our grandchildren, that will be working for our community in the future. So I think that's important. At that point in time, that was 2004, when we won the big 20%, which, by the way, became a national, what would you call that, shining light, where everybody wanted 20% from their community. So I think that's a good thing. And we did the dog and pony show across Canada promoting our 20%. If we could do it here in Hamilton, how come it can't work in other places? So that was a huge coup in 2004. And then from there, it was the development of Headache. People don't realize, but in 1999, when the homelessness funds became available, some of the agencies in Hamilton were meeting informally at that time. And I think it began with the Indian Center, the Native Women's Center, and Urban Native Homes. Those three women, Kathy Statz from the Indian Center, Urban Native Homes would be Janice Lewis Daly, and Native Women's Center, back in the day, that would have
Sandra
been...
Williams? No. Someone after that.
Yeah, I think Sherry Lewis became it later, but before that, I can't remember her name.
Longboat?
Yeah. What's her
I'm
first
trying to
name?
think of her first name. Longboat. She's a
Yeah.
Longboat. I think of Sharon for some. Sharon Longboat.
Longboat. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one. So those three women were the first three that started meeting and collaborating informally. And then in 1999, when we got the homelessness crisis hit the Canadian, or all Canadians, then that's when NEPAM tried to promote a more collaborative approach around all the agencies. And so it's funny that actually Headache was born out of homelessness. And Headache, or the agencies, began meeting to talk about this homelessness funding, and hence we became Headache, the Hamilton Executive Directors Aboriginal Coalition, and which years later changed their name to CHIL, the Coalition of Hamilton Indigenous Leadership. Excuse me. So 1999, when that began, I started working with SPRC in 2002. And
Is this where Connie comes in?
Connie comes in right around there, because then we went to our health counts report, because from the SPRC, we started figuring out that the use of documentation, which we're doing here now, and the use of empirical evidence and the use of quantitative evidence and qualitative evidence was really important for us to be able to move forward. And we started working with the Aboriginal Health Center with one of our first major research projects, and that was the Our Health Counts.
Yes, and the Our Health Counts actually still lives on today, because even though I retired last year, I'm still doing some work with the Our Health Counts data, and I'm still, just helping them, put some anecdotal information around how it's helped the community, having that empirical data. But it also moved into another study on homelessness of Indigenous folks here in Hamilton. And they're still taking apart that data. And that was done when Deitwada Desna was, when they were doing homelessness. So they're pulling apart that data to take a look at, how much did it really, did the programming really help? Where did it support folks the most, that kind of thing? What is the long-term effect of that of our strategies at the health center?
Our first major research project was that, Our Health Counts.
And now that Our Health Counts, and the work that, it was actually 3 different projects, one for Inuit and Métis. Those were done, I think, in Hamilton, Ottawa.
Ottawa.
And then the Our Health Counts was First Nations, done in Hamilton. And now
it was a pilot project too.
it was a pilot project. So now they've gone and they've developed the Our Health Counts program, research program.
So it went from research to a program now.
Well, it's a research type program, so it's more streamlined now in terms of what they want to collect in terms of data. So they've done London, they've done Toronto. I think the Thunder Bay they were working on. I know that they just started in Winnipeg. This is going to be a national research project that really the strongest evidence was developed here in Hamilton at Deitwada.
Well, I have to say, and put my hand into the hat here, is I was one of the guinea pigs. These guys, I remember Cindy, she was recruiting people because it was trying to get the community involved,
Yes.
right? And I remember Cindy saying, Yvonne, we give you this, it's like a ticket, right? You take
The snowball effect. For
that's it. So I was a guinea pig, and she's like, okay, you're going to do this. And then not from me, then I went to the other people, my family, and because you had to talk about the project, you had to convince them this was a worthwhile project to come into. Because
Yes.
how long was the interview? That was a lot of information
Yes.
that you had to sit there, you know, with that person. So, and again, the mistrust of the house system too. So all that came into play, but I just remember saying, here, I need you to be a guinea pig in the beginning. So I was one of the first, you know, people to be that person to go out. I went, did the questions or whatever, survey, and then passed my ticket on to somebody else. And then they come in and do that. So, yeah.
I think the development of Indigenous methodologies was the most important learning from that. You know, how do you do research in the Indigenous community? And that was one of our methodologies that we developed with the Dr. Janet Smiley, was the snowball effect of, or there was a name for it too, I can't remember, but it had to do with the old snowball effect. You know, you give Yvonne 10 tickets and she gives it to 10 other people, and they give them each 10 tickets to go out to 10 other people. So, but those developments of Indigenous methodologies was something that we all learned to do with all of our other projects that were going on. For example, the homelessness point in time count. It was the first time that we had a new enumeration event in Hamilton where we were specifically targeting an Indigenous specific enumeration process. And so the federal government was doing it national, and that was 2014, I think. When we did our first one.
Yeah.
And we did Indigenous specific. We didn't even participate with the municipality. The municipality did theirs the following year, but we did our specific one in 2014 to help develop that methodology. And what, you know, again, the Hamilton being the shining star that it is, we worked with the Conservatory on Homelessness and developed the point in time toolkit to show other communities across Canada how to work collaboratively with their Indigenous partners and get better results and get better statistics.
Well, you know, back in that time, the most revealing thing to me was the fact that when the Indigenous folks went out and asked the questions that first time, the numbers were much higher in terms of people feeling safe enough to disclose.
Well, again, I just hate to say, I was in there. She brought me in and to tell me this is what we need. And I went out there and I found us 50 volunteers.
Yeah.
But again, it was me working with the homeless and people I knew. It's like, and they came on board, because that first time we did that over at the bus station. And the people I relied on, like they were people that I was feeding on the street, right? Through, you know, whatever I was doing, different programs I was doing. And so, and the relationship I had built up with them, right? But we talked about these things, how strong it would be if we could do that. And she tells me I did. I went out there, I got us the people we needed, brought them in, and I think that was one of the most successful point in times we had, because it was grassroots, very grassroots.
And it makes sense to us, and we have the same messaging from all our people, you know, it makes sense. Who are we going to, here's somebody that's on the street that's looking at the ground. Are they going to look up and speak to a white guy with a suit on? No. If they're going to look up and see a brown woman with long and dark hair, they're going to say, hey, sister, you know, and that's what happened. Is that, you know, we even tested it where we had survey teams go out, and there was 3 people in the survey team, and the one from the city of Hamilton, who was quite coiffed, you know, had his beard all nicely done up and everything else, and he wore his usual sort of professional attire, and he went to this group of Indigenous people on the street, and they wouldn't even give him the time of day. And then they saw me and they said, hey sister, where are you from? You know, because again, they recognize us, they know us, they see our brown skin, they see our dark hair, they recognize that we're part of their family, and that we love them, and they feel that trust.
Well, there's such a stigma. I know that for me growing up, you know, we were never allowed to talk about being part Cree. You know, if anyone stopped us on the street, we were to say we were Scottish. We weren't Scottish. We were Danish. But we were supposed to say we were Scottish, and because we didn't want to be grabbed by the system and put into children's aid.
Yes.
Right? And so there's this fear that we were raised with. You don't disclose.
Yes.
And so I can just imagine the people on the street, you know, somebody coming up to them, if they look like they just walked out of an office, I'm not disclosing anything. Right?
Yeah, there's
because
no trust.
you're
No
taught
trust.
from an early age,
Not
be
to trust.
afraid.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
And you know that well for the health field too.
absolutely, absolutely.
And how the horrendous stories that we hear about health, and you wonder why Indigenous people don't want to walk into a hospital. And actually that sort of flows into Hamilton. We were talking about some of the health dates in Hamilton, and one of them was the Silversmith family back in the when we first
Yes.
got the health navigators off the ground. And it was the same idea where this family from Six Nations came into town, and they didn't realize that, was it the mother, the grandmother?
Mother, I think.
Was allergic to aspirin or
Tylenol.
Tylenol. And they were speaking to her, and in her fear, all she could speak was her native language, and they gave her the Tylenol without realizing it, and she died. You know? How does that happen? Why didn't you reach out to the Indian Center? Why didn't you see if there was somebody that was available that could translate for you, instead of giving somebody medicine and then perpetuating the, you know, the distrust once again in this system? You know, and from that became the navigators that we got installed into the health systems. You know, and so there's a lot of good work that went in Hamilton, and Connie was part of that whole process in those years. Yvonne and I have been part of that process since we were young, but as in a professional way, Connie, you were the first one to me that sort of recognized the need for all of us to work together, even more so in that health field.
Yeah, well, and you know, I guess that goes back to how did I end up here, right? So I came, as I said, I was born and raised in Timmins, and I had spent 3 years in Thunder Bay, and through that, I seen a number of issues with First Nations. I was working in mental health, and I remember wanting to. I was an executive director. I've been an executive director since 1993, and I remember wanting to, like, in the pit of my stomach, feeling that if I could go on reserve and give them some mental health support, even if it was just building peer support and giving them the tools that they needed to have support groups and stuff like that, that would be supportive, would be a great thing. At least it'd be a contribution in some way. And I was told that if I did that, our organization would lose our ministry funding because we were not allowed
To do anything.
to do anything.
Yes.
And you know, this is at a time, you know, by the time I was 30, my mother was saying, we all need to get our Métis cards. You know, you guys have to start standing up. You know, the time of being afraid is gone, right?
Yes.
And so, you know, and of course it was part of us. Like, I can't tell you the reverse discrimination I felt, always trying to be part of the Indigenous community because, you know, I was the oldest of all the grandchildren. So I remember, my grandfather was born on reserve. I remember my great-grandmother. I remember her speaking in Cree. I remember so many things, and that's who, you know, you find in your family the people that you gravitate to and you know you're part of.
Yes.
And to me, that's who I was part of, right? And I always wanted to do something. It was always tearing me apart, but nobody would ever accept me. I remember one time in Timmins saying, oh, there's a support group for Indigenous people. I want to go. At that point, they were saying, oh, well, you know, you're Native. I said, I'm not Native, I'm Indian. I was born an Indian, I'm going to die an Indian.
I see the same thing.
Right?
Everybody else changing all these words.
Well, you can't say that anymore. I said, yeah, like, how can you tell me who I am, right? So, you know, and I remember wanting to be part of this support group to try and get to understand who I was. And some person who was really trying to be a nice individual came up, put their hand on my shoulder, somebody who was not Indigenous, and said, it's okay, Connie, we have groups for people like you too. And I was like, this is about trying to figure out my culture, lady. Like, So anyway, fast forward a few years, I ended up in Ottawa. I was national executive director, and I was working in mental health, and we were moving. We had created a national coalition, and that coalition is the group that lobbied for the changes in mental health in Canada.
Oh.
Up until then, there was only $250,000 allocated to mental health for the whole country. And people all over the country were slipping through the cracks,
Yes.
right? They'd all been let out into the community, no
Yes,
supports.
because they closed the hospitals
That's
down,
right.
and yes.
And you would see on the newspaper, front of the newspaper, psycho this or schizo that, and you know, the medical community was draining the mental health departments in the hospital so that they could give the money to surgery. So the people who were the sickest and most unwell mentally were living in conditions that weren't great. So we formed a coalition, and this will go back to headache or chill in a minute. But and that coalition started working with the Standing Senate Committee on Science and Technology, and I was the chair of the coalition at that time. And I remember having to advocate for mental health in a study on mental health in Canada. Well, they had two topics they could do. One was Indigenous people, and one was mental health in Canada. And I was the chair of 19 national organizations working in mental health, and in the pit of my stomach wanting to say, pick Indigenous. So I swore to myself, because I was humiliated, because I wasn't true to my heart. I swore to myself that when I was finished with mental health, I was going to come and work in the Indigenous community. I didn't care if I was washing dishes. But I felt that I had let down my people, right?
Yeah, there was your opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I would let down the other people, right?
You were in a hard spot.
Yeah, I was in a very tough spot. And if I would have said Indigenous, it wouldn't have made a difference because I was representing a coalition. But, you know, when you look at the changes in mental health since that time till now, you can see why I have this particular belief in coalition building. I believe that as a team, 1 + 1 is 5, right? And that's what I really believe in. When you talk about leadership, you know, you said, well, what was your contribution, right? I don't know that I've ever really made a contribution except to say, okay, let's all get together. This is what I'm hearing. Let's figure out how to work together to figure it out. I don't know any more than anybody else. In fact, I probably know less. But
Well, all of us working together, utilizing all our own gifts and our abilities, what a change we've made.
absolutely.
And what a change we can continue to make into the future.
Yeah.
Even the picking of the headache name when we were first picking that out.
I
with
like
the
headache.
Yeah. The Hamilton Executive Directors Aboriginal Coalition.
Yes.
You know, and
Yes.
we laugh so hard because as Indigenous people, humor is part of our toolkit.
Yes,
That's
it
right.
is.
You know, if we're not going to laugh, we're going to cry.
Yeah.
So we might as well laugh.
Yeah.
So we thought, well, if we're going to name ourselves, we're going to name ourselves Headache, because we get a laugh out of that. Because darn, you know, at the time I think we had 12 to 16 agencies and groups all sitting at Headache all together, and we worked on a consensus-based model. So that meant every single one of us had to agree, or else no action was taken. So it became a headache at some times. So we thought that was quite funny, and then they changed their name to Chill. It's like, what's wrong with you? It's
Yeah.
still a headache, whether it's called Chill or not, because still trying to get all those agencies to work together and agree to something is still a headache, you know?
Well, and it's funny because the first couple of years I kept saying, no, it's headache, headache, it's a headache. And then after a couple of years, it was like, they're right, it's headache.
Like Cindy said, if you didn't have a headache, you'd have a headache after.
Yep.
I remember those days.
Yeah. But I think that the branding was really important too. You know, we had to change that. You know, it was headache. To us, it's a headache, but we didn't need the rest of the community
Thinking it was a headache?
to think it was a headache.
So that's why that name change happened. So
Yes.
in 2012, when I left and started specifically working only with the Social Planning Research Council so that Headache could become their own entity without my influence. At that time, I don't know when they ended up changing their name, but in 2019, and 2020, the name actually changed. But before I left, it was they were all, oh, we have to change our name. It's too negative. And I'm going, you have to remember your history. And it's all, and there's a reason why we called ourselves Headache. So it's good that some of that reasoning will now be marked down in our history, so people can understand why we called ourselves a Headache. But
and it always was a good laugh though when we met with politicians or anybody mainstream, because they're a headache.
Well, you try having 16 organizations build consensus and tell me how much of a headache that is.
So your next move on that, are we going to move to?
Well, 2012 was when
I came in 2011. I didn't really do much with the community until 2013. It was really a matter of coming in and becoming acquainted with Deidwatedaesna, the number of programs and services, recognizing that there was inequality between Brantford and Hamilton, and we had to put some equity in there by making sure that all of the programs were in both communities. And it was also a time when I was able to reach out to the community and really take a look at the way in which things were, So, it was in that time actually that I said, you know what, we really need one-stop shopping. We need a place where the community can come together, have lunch together, see their doctor if they need to, maybe go and talk about housing supports with somebody, see a counselor, or play euchre in a room with other folks.
That was always the dream. That's
Yes.
always been the dream in the Hamilton community.
It's
is
funny
a
how
one-stop
the
shop.
single messaging still goes over from decade to decade, because when I first became involved professionally,
there a long
it was
time.
always the vision of a one-stop type of model.
Yeah.
We even had the property down there beside
191 Barton Street.
yeah, that's what
That was the
priest-
idea there.
The priest's
Yeah.
house or something, whatever it's called. That was our first property to try and do that. But trying to work together, and we just didn't have the funds, or we weren't very good at capital yet.
Yes.
And it's still a problem to this day, learning how to be good at these capital projects, especially as it pertains to housing.
Well, and I think that some of it really goes back to the government.
Oh,
right?
definitely.
Because
They don't want us to have capital to do that.
Well, and to be in a one-stop shop, everybody has to be on the same page. So that means everybody's got to be asking for capital for their own unique organizations. And often they're different ministries. They don't talk to each other. Sometimes the process is always different for every ministry. And what you need going in is different. So trying to get all of that together, I think, has been difficult for the community. I think that the dream is there and it will happen. But I think that we've really had a number of stumbling blocks, and they've been put in front of us. It hasn't been the fault of the community, right?
It always comes back to who's holding the purse strings. That's the bottom line.
That's right.
That's
And
the
those
bottom
challenges are often met by a unified effort on behalf of the entire community to overcome those challenges.
Yeah.
So I guess that's part of our messaging for future generations too, is, when these challenges mount up, just remember, the ones before you had these challenges and they were able to overcome them. And how did we overcome them? By working collaboratively together as Indigenous agencies.
And something else that was really striking over that decade, or a little more than the decade, was how the organizations actually worked together. So if I needed, bus tickets for somebody and I couldn't provide them through my program, I could call an executive director at another organization and say, you know what, we have a crisis here, we need this, and somebody else would cover it. We did it in a way that was not about putting up silos.
Yes.
We've always worked in collaboration. We've just never been under one roof. And I think that would be my message, always work in collaboration. Always, for me, I think that my strength often has been, you get involved in a committee and you sit back and you don't say a word for 3 or 4, 5 meetings. You know, you might say one or two things, but you really try to stay quiet and listen to what people are really saying around the table. Understand what their agenda is. And when you understand their agenda, you understand how it conflicts with your own and where you can support. And every opportunity that you have to support others will come back in spades, because you may need something someday. And it's then that, you know, you could put up your hand and say, I need this. And those that you've supported along the way, instead of challenging them, they will come and support you. The job of the leader is really to look at everybody else and be the biggest. To me, being a leader is about being the greatest servant to the community. So you know, people think leaders are up here. I really think they're like this down here, because it's really about taking care of everybody else's needs. And sometimes that's to our detriment.
Yes.
Because we burn ourselves out because we're serving everybody else and we're not filling our own jar, right?
Spirit. No, I agree. I think when you're talking about leadership, there's a distinction between organizational leadership, community leadership, and personal leadership, your own personal family life, and the roles that you play as a helper or whatever you want to call them within all those three areas. But Indigenous leadership to me is not just the EDs. I was never an ED. I never wanted to be an ED. And I'm only an ED now because somehow I got pulled back into the community after my retirement. But I don't want to be that person out in the taking care of all those operational things. I want to be the helper on the community, the grassroots level, the behind the scenes worker, the one that's there, the one that knows, the one that can pull together her influences and use her skills as a facilitator or as a coalition builder to get everybody to work together. There's some of my skills. You know, facilitating, keeping the peace, getting people to work together. I always remember Yvonne Maracle from the Ontario Federation of Indian Friendship Centers came into town one day, and she was looking at the model in Hamilton with regards to headache. And I said, well, this model could work in other places. And she said, no, it wouldn't. And I said, why? And she said, because other places don't have you. She said, you're the glue that pulls all these agencies together, and you know them all so well, and that trying to get that model to work in other places depends on what that community, what level, what stage they're at that time. So I'll always remember that, because to me it just promoted the importance again of assigning importance of us working together, and how those leaders have to be involved with that, whether it's at the grassroots level. It doesn't matter what level you're at. You know, to me, these titles are just titles. That's right. And what matters is that person's heart and their commitment to their community and their family and to our Indigenous culture. You know, for Indigenous, by Indigenous is an idealism that's been born long before that term came around. And that's still important to today. And we have to recognize it as we play within their system. You know, as we build our boards of directors. You know, well, how many directors should be Indigenous? All of the directors should be Indigenous. If this is an Indigenous agency, there's no room for decision makers that are not Indigenous. What do you call Indigenous? Indigenous is a person that self-identifies as Indigenous. That person doesn't need to carry a Métis card. That person doesn't need to have a status card. That person is recognized by their home community as an Indigenous person, or an Aboriginal person, or an Indian, or whatever term they wish to call us. We call ourselves Ongwahoweh. We're the original people. Good to have you two here to remind me of some of these things, because the foggy brain of grief, I don't have very good memory right now since the passing of Jeremiah last year, so it's like when you start bringing up these things, it's like, what was the name of that person? Sharon Longboat. How did I not remember Sharon Longboat's name? You know, she ended up in her old age being my uncle's partner.
Oh my God, and you don't remember her name?
Yeah, Rick Birdie. I was like, oh my goodness, how can I not remember her name? So.
Hey, I'll tell you from my experience from these conversations, many of us, it's foggy brain. Mm-hmm. And as we're getting older, and some of us are a lot older, does the dialogue help doing this? Yeah. You know, we start talking, oh yeah, and then, you know, they would remember something and contribute. But we're all, so that's why what we're doing right now is so important, right?
It
Just like
is.
Cindy was saying. And I know for myself, I've been an advocate about reporting history. I've been bugging her about that, just because, again, my affiliation with NEPA. And I just went through that the photography, saving the collection, getting that all to the proper places. But I see too with our community, because seeing so many passing, that's what really got me going with that. You know, I look at like Adeline Lewis and Ray. Like those two were husband and wife, and they went within the same week. Yeah. One went down and the other one followed. Yeah. How many more can go down like that? Right? And even looking at my speakers, like I think I've mentored under many people here, and as a youngster, and then seeing them now and thinking, oh my God, I don't know how much longer they'll be here, because we're all getting older.
And we're losing our friends,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
The people that we worked
Family and
with, yeah.
community, yes, yes.
This last month's been a rough month in our community. There's been a lot of loss. So it's important that, like Yvonne says, that we recognize the people that played a role within our community that are no longer here. Mm-hmm. You know, it's because of those helpers back from the early days. And that's what they did it for, was they wanted to help their community. Yeah. So you can call it community engagement, community mobilization. You want to say something special here? Language is a big word. You know, what they use for their terms and how they describe things compared to our language and what we learn and how to say it are two different things. So as we move forward, we have to recognize that our language is really important, not only for our culture, but the importance of language, period, and how that language is portrayed in policy, how it's portrayed in legislation. All that language is really important, but the Mohawk language is most important of all.
Yeah, I have to say we've had one too many Mohawks on this panel. I'm a Mohawk too. But I noticed with their talks, we have been overwhelmed with the Mohawks and Bear Clan.
Turtle Clan.
Fish Clan.
Okay. So we have a mixture here, but I've had a talk where we're all Bear Clan and Mohawks. But yeah, it's, I think of the past too, and all the people have come before me. I think when I first came to this community, the ones I mentored, like I think of Corrine Williams, right? Yes. Because I'm like 10, 15 younger than any of these guys, but I hung out with all these women. Yeah. You know, I remember Sharon Smoke, she was the receptionist at the Indian Center. Lee Steyer Stats. Loft now. Yeah. And who else is, Adeline. Adeline Lewis. There's a few of them under there that are gone now. Like I look at Corrine Williams. I know she's gone, but she used to make me laugh. Yeah. Adeline Lewis, she's gone now with her hubby, but she made me laugh. I remember one AGM, and she wanted to run for the board, and she said, I don't know what to say, Yvonne. I said, say you make good scones, as a joke. She stood up, I make good scones. She got voted in. I was like, I didn't know she was serious. But yeah, I mentored under these. When I came into the community, these are the people. I think working with SBRC, like Cindy Sue said, though, that helped me. That helped me to see how things function, how they work, and the importance, like where we're at now with the data collection, with the data collection and all that. I see a new light there, right? And the importance of it. And, you know, so working under Cindy Sue with SPRC. And I was the one that was, you know, Yvonne, we got to do this. Yvonne, we got to do this. And being, you know, involved with, you know, developing the first pit count there, Indigenous, recruiting. No, Yvonne, we need 50 Indigenous people. Okay, I'll see what I can do. Like, you know, like, yeah, I learned a lot of skills doing that. And it just connected me more to community.
But you mentored under other people, but now it's other people mentoring underneath us.
Yes.
You know, where are those helpers that are showing the next generations in whatever formats that we have to learn how to utilize what the history was, so that it helps them move forward with the vision, the long-term vision.
Yes.
These are not short-term visions. These are the same messages we've been promoting for decade after decade. So if anything, it would be the fact that this project is really important, because it's been messaged for decades how important it is. Yes. So now the next generations will have some of that oral history recorded.
Yes. But you know, it may be the same messages, but we've come a long way,
Well, you
baby.
betcha.
I like that. We've
You
come
know.
a long way, baby. Yes.
Yes,
You betcha.
you know, we wouldn't have been sitting here in front of a camera having this tea talk 10 years ago,
No,
That's true.
right? And it's really, the youth need to have the courage to step forward, and they have to have the courage to want to help
Yeah.
and recognize that you are a tool for the community. You know, and I
They
think
can
that
make a difference.
they can make a huge difference. And
Yes.
it isn't just about, you know, them in that point. It's about their children,
Yes.
their nieces, their nephews,
Next
the
generation.
next
The next
generation
seventh
that are coming.
generations.
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of it has to do with them having the courage to stand up, because I know it took a lot at the beginning for me, and that's how I started, by volunteering. You start volunteering, you know, in 5 years from now, you have a career,
Yes.
right?
Get your foot in the door.
That's right.
Get your foot in the door.
And it gives you an opportunity to understand what you like to do,
Yes.
what interests you. So
I fully 100% agree.
yeah, and you're serving your community just by volunteering.
Yes.
And that's why our children are volunteers at a young age.
Yeah.
You know, all the kids in my family. We go to the Indian Center,
Or the
they're-
powwows,
or the
or-
powwows, and they're out picking up the garbage. They're out surveying because they know
Yeah.
this is their role and responsibility within our community. That's volunteering.
Yeah.
So ladies, we're going to wind down now. Okay. I had a really good talk here. So what I'd like you to do now is, as part of your legacy or something, a message you want to leave behind. I'm going to start with Connie. What would you like to leave behind for the people?
I think that it's important to volunteer. I think it's important to open your heart. I know that through my life and my struggles, it hasn't always been easy to open my heart to others. But I think that when you open your heart and make that connection with others, it makes your life so much more rich. And I think that it gives others an opportunity to have a rich life as well. I think that it's important to always realize that 1 + 1 = 5. So if you could get a couple of people together, no matter what your mission is, if you really believe it will come to fruition, it will. It just may take a long, long time.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
Cindy?
But don't give up hope.
That's right, don't give up
You
hope.
know, you know, those 1 + 1s, plus ones, plus ones, plus ones turn into a mighty big force. So I think the main messaging I have to promote is for Indigenous by Indigenous, because as we move forward in their structures, we have to remember that the people that are the decision makers should be Indigenous. We have to remember that when we do things, it should be done in an Indigenous lens, you know, or with an Indigenous lens. So using Indigenous methodologies. So I think that's important. And I have to agree with Connie is again, being a helper for our community. That's what that grassroots thing is. When you look at these circles that we have, the middle of that is the community, and that's our fire. That's our spirit, is that middle piece. That's the community. That's who we're here to help, is the community. And I think it's important to recognize that.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So winding down from the last talks here, I'd like to thank my members, my people that have come here, community members. Ladies have done a lot. I have a lot of respect for both of you. You know, you are community leaders in that sense, and I've been involved with both of you. So you know me, I know you, and but yes, I commend you for the work that you have done. And I think it's really important that, like we're all saying, for the younger people, the recording of this, that we know, again, when our youth know their past, it only makes them stronger for that fight there. Now I don't want to say fight, because you use such lovely words. I mean, I'll be fighting, but you use those nice words for that moving on, that transition to future. And yeah, we need as much support as we can get for our people. So I thank you both for coming and joining. This is winding up for our Tea Talk session. I thank you very much for joining us, and that's it.